On March 3, 2025, a white SUV rolled into my bay for a routine brake job. The owner had already bought the parts. He held up a box he had ordered online, proud of the deal he had found. $15 for a full set of front brake pads. Free shipping, nearly 500 reviews, and a 4.2-star rating. He said he had done his research. He said they were compatible with his vehicle. He said the price difference between these and the name brand set at the parts store was over $90, and he was not going to throw away $90 on branding. I did not argue with him. I installed them. And then I drove the truck. The moment that followed is why I am making this video. What I felt under my foot in that parking lot was not a minor difference in stopping power. It was not a subtle change in brake feel. It was something that made me immediately pull back into the bay, lift the vehicle again, and pull those pads off after less than a quarter mile of low-speed driving. This video is about what I found, what the testing revealed, and why the gap between a $10 brake pad and a $100 brake pad is not a marketing story. It is a physics story. Once you understand the physics, you will never look at cheap brakes the same way again. Brakes are the only system on your vehicle whose entire job is to keep you alive when everything goes wrong. Not comfortable, not efficient, alive. When a child runs into the street, when the car in front of you stops without warning, when road conditions change in a fraction of a second, you do not get a second attempt. The brake pad is the last line between momentum and disaster. And most people are shopping for that part the same way they shop for phone cases. I have been installing, testing, and analyzing brake components for over 2 decades. I have seen pads fail at 6,000 miles and pads outlast the vehicles they were installed on. I have seen budget pads that impressed me and premium pads that disappointed. But in the last 3 years, as online marketplaces have flooded with unbranded hardware from manufacturing facilities with zero accountability, the gap has grown into something that genuinely concerns me. This is not a video about brand loyalty. This is a video about data. I put $10 pads and $100 pads through identical conditions, and I measured everything I could measure: temperature, stopping distance, fade resistance, noise, rotor wear, and dust composition. What I found was not what I expected. Some of it was worse than I expected, and one specific result was genuinely terrifying in a way that took me a moment to process. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what separates a bargain brake pad from a quality one, why that difference matters at the moment you need brakes most, and how to make a smart decision without overspending. Not every expensive pad is worth it, and not every budget pad is dangerous, but some of them absolutely are, and knowing the difference might save your life. To understand why brake pads vary so dramatically in performance, you first need to understand what a brake pad actually does at the molecular level. Most drivers think braking is simple. You push the pedal, the pad clamps the rotor, friction slows the wheel. That is the overview. But what actually happens inside the friction material under heavy braking is extraordinarily complex, and it is where cheap pads begin to fail in ways you cannot see or feel until it is too late. When a brake pad contacts a spinning rotor, it does not just drag against metal. It undergoes a controlled thermochemical reaction. The friction material, a compressed composite of anywhere from 10 to 30 different compounds depending on the manufacturer, transfers energy from motion into heat. A good brake pad does this efficiently and consistently. The friction coefficient, the technical measure of how much stopping force the pad generates per unit of clamping pressure, should remain stable across a wide temperature range. Under panic stop conditions on a highway, pad surface temperatures can exceed 600 degrees Celsius within seconds. At those temperatures, a cheap pad does not just wear faster. It can change chemically. The binding resins that hold the friction material together begin to outgas. This process is called green fade, and it is one of the most dangerous brake failure modes because it does not feel like failure. It feels like the brakes still work, just slightly less than before. Slightly less at 300 degrees can mean the difference between stopping in 90 feet and stopping in 140 feet. The friction material in a quality pad is engineered specifically to resist thermal decomposition. Compounds like ceramic particles, Kevlar fibers, metallic powders, and proprietary binding resins are selected and proportioned through thousands of hours of testing to maintain stable performance across the entire operating temperature range. The friction coefficient in a high-end pad might vary by 2 to 5% between a cold stop and a hot stop. In a bargain pad manufactured to hit a price point with no independent validation, that variance can reach 40% or more. And here is the part that makes that number terrifying. Your car's anti-lock braking system, stability control, and emergency brake assist are all calibrated around an assumed friction coefficient. When the pad underperforms under heat, the entire safety architecture of your vehicle is working with incorrect inputs. The car thinks it knows how fast it can stop. It is wrong. There is another factor most drivers never consider: consistency. Not just from stop to stop, but from pad to pad within the same box. Quality manufacturers use precise ingredient proportioning, controlled mixing processes, and high-pressure hydraulic presses to ensure every pad in a set behaves identically. Low-cost manufacturers operating without certification often show alarming variation in density, hardness, and friction output, even between the two pads going onto the same axle. When your left front pad generates significantly more braking force than your right under hard braking, your car does not stop straight. It pulls. At highway speeds during a panic stop, a pull caused by uneven brake bias can send a vehicle into an adjacent lane. This is not a theoretical risk. It is a documented failure mode, and it is far more common with unverified friction materials than the industry openly acknowledges. This is where I need to walk you through exactly what I tested and what the numbers showed, because data does not lie even when price tags do. I selected 6 brake pad sets for this test. 2 budget options priced between $8 and $15 per axle, sourced from online marketplaces with no recognizable brand name. 2 mid-range options priced between $35 and $55 from brands available at major retail parts stores. 2 premium options priced between $80 and $110 from OEM-affiliated or Tier 1 manufacturers with documented friction coefficients and independent testing certifications. All 6 sets were installed on identical vehicles, same make, same model, same year, same rotor specification, fresh from the box. I used a calibrated infrared temperature sensor, a precision GPS-based deceleration logger, and a consistent test protocol including cold stops, progressive heat cycles, and simulated panic stops from 60 miles per hour on a closed course. The cold stop results were the first surprise. At ambient temperature with no prior heat cycling, the performance gap was smaller than I expected. The cheap pads stopped from 60 miles per hour in an average of 143 feet. The premium pads stopped in 138 feet, a 5-foot difference at cold temperatures. Meaningful, but not shocking. If braking only ever happened cold, the story would be less dramatic. Then I ran the heat cycle protocol. 10 consecutive hard stops from 50 miles per hour with 30-second intervals designed to replicate aggressive city driving or a mountain descent. At the 4th stop, the first cheap pad set began to show fade. By the 7th stop, the stopping distance had increased to 179 feet from the same 60 miles per hour entry speed. That is a 25% degradation in stopping performance from a simple 10-stop sequence. The rotor surface had also developed a visible, uneven layer of pad material, a phenomenon called pad deposit or hot spot formation, which causes brake judder and further reduces consistent friction contact. The premium pads, at the same point in the heat cycle, showed a stopping distance of 141 feet, nearly identical to their cold performance. That is what engineered thermal stability looks like in practice. But the result that genuinely stopped me was the panic stop test following a full heat cycle. I ran both pad sets hot, gave them a 3-minute rest, which is realistic for someone who has just driven down a long highway grade and then encounters an emergency, and then measured full-force panic stops. The budget pads, which had already been cycled through heat, stopped the vehicle in 194 feet. The premium pads stopped in 136 feet. That is a difference of 58 feet. At 60 miles per hour, a vehicle travels 88 feet per second. That gap is more than half a second of additional travel time. At that speed, half a second is the difference between stopping before the intersection and entering it. I want that number to settle before I continue. Same vehicle, same driver, same speed, same surface. 58 additional feet of stopping distance. Not because the cheap pads failed suddenly, not because they broke or fell apart, but because they did exactly what cheap friction material does under thermal stress. They softened, they outgassed, they transferred uneven deposits, they performed the way physics says unvalidated friction compounds perform when exposed to real-world conditions. The rotor damage data was equally significant. After the full test protocol, the rotors paired with the budget pads showed surface scoring, uneven deposits, and measurable thickness variation that would require replacement in a vehicle with normal service intervals. The rotors paired with the premium pads showed minimal surface wear and even pad transfer, consistent with what manufacturers call normal break-in. In practical terms, the $90 you save on the cheap pad set will cost you $200 or more in rotor replacement within 18 months. The math does not work, even before you account for the safety implications. There is a factor the test numbers cannot fully capture. It is the one that concerns me most about the current online marketplace: friction material composition verification. Premium brake pad manufacturers publish their friction coefficients. They submit products to independent testing organizations. Their materials meet or exceed standards set by regulatory bodies and original equipment specifications. The unbranded pads flooding online retail have no such accountability. There is no verification requirement, no mandated testing, and no friction coefficient disclosure. A manufacturer can compress any combination of materials into the shape of a brake pad, package it in a professional-looking box with a 4-star review aggregate built from early-stage promotional sales, and put it on a platform that ships it to your door in 2 days. Some of those unverified pads happen to work adequately. I have tested a few that genuinely surprised me, but the variance is the problem. Without testing, you have no idea which version you received. And the version that works fine in 10,000 mild braking events can fail catastrophically in stop number 10,001, the one where it actually matters. This is the core argument against cheap brake pads that no one in the discount parts world wants to have openly. It is not that every cheap pad is dangerous, it is that you have no reliable way to know whether the specific set you purchased is the safe version or the dangerous version. With a certified documented friction material from a reputable manufacturer, you are buying a tested and validated outcome. With an unverified online pad, you are running an experiment with your family in the vehicle. Brakes are not a system where the risk and reward of saving money is distributed evenly. Almost every other maintenance decision on your vehicle involves a trade-off, where a cheaper option works adequately most of the time and fails in a way that causes inconvenience, a rough idle, a rough shift, or reduced fuel economy. A brake system failure does not cause inconvenience. It causes the worst moment of your life or ends it. That asymmetry changes the calculation completely. This does not mean you need to spend the maximum on every brake job. It means you need to spend smart. Mid-range pads from a recognizable manufacturer with documented performance specifications represent the right balance for most drivers. The step from unverified budget hardware to a validated mid-range option is where the meaningful safety improvement happens. The step from mid-range to premium matters most for performance vehicles, heavy towing applications, mountain driving, and high-mileage daily drivers who accumulate significant thermal stress on their brakes. Know your vehicle, know your driving conditions, and buy pads that were tested to handle them. The owner of that white SUV came back 2 days after I sent him home with a set of mid-range pads installed at no charge for the labor. He drove the same parking lot loop I had driven with the cheap pads on. He looked at me when he climbed out and said nothing for a moment. Then he told me he could feel the difference. I asked him if the original pads felt bad. He said no, they felt normal. And that is exactly the problem. Dangerous brake degradation does not announce itself. It happens quietly, thermally, chemically, in the seconds between normal and emergency. By the time you feel it, you are already inside the gap. If you have never thought about what is behind your wheels before watching this video, you are not alone. Most drivers choose brake pads the same way they choose batteries or windshield wipers, by price and compatibility. But now you understand what is actually happening at 600 degrees Celsius inside that friction material when everything depends on it. You understand what 58 feet means at highway speed. You understand why the rating on a product listing is not a safety certification. Before your next brake job, check the friction coefficient rating. Look for an FF or FG designation on the box, which indicates independent friction testing. Buy from manufacturers that publish their test data. Spend what the safety actually costs. And if someone hands you a $15 brake pad and calls it a deal, remember what that deal looks like at stop number 7 of 10 consecutive hard stops. Subscribe if you want more tests like this, ones that do not just show you prices, but that show you what is actually happening inside the parts you trust with your life. Drop in the comments what you paid for your last brake job and whether anyone ever explained this to you, because most shops do not, and they should. Your brakes are not a place to find savings. They are the place where every dollar you spent or did not spend shows up at the worst possible moment.